Have you ever heard the saying, the cobbler's children have no shoes? Well, luckily, I'm not a cobbler, and my kid does indeed have shoes. A lot of them, actually. But I am a furniture maker, and this is the desk I use. So, I've never really made a piece of furniture for myself. Yes, I have plenty of prototype pieces or things I've built on spec that never sold, and to be completely honest, our house has a lot of my furniture in it. So, the saying isn't completely true. Don't worry, my kid has tables to sit at and chairs to sit on, but for the most part, I almost never make anything with the full expectation that I'll keep it, or design something specifically for myself. But all that is changing today. And I'm designing and building a new desk for myself, because every once in a while, you just gotta treat yourself. And the best part is, I get to do whatever I want. The flip side of that is, regardless of whether or not I get to do whatever I want, I still have to make a desk and a cabinet with drawers, and that means making a lot of panels. See? Panel, 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 panel. You get the point. So we start this build by, well, making panels. And in my mind, there are two types of panels in furniture: boring panels and fun panels. And that might not make any sense. Actually, it probably doesn't make sense. So I'll explain. I'm going to have panels for the cabinet, and I would put those in the boring panel category. They're flat, they stay flat, and they're destined to become a box, which, let's be honest, is a pretty boring shape. Then we have these panels, which are fun panels. They might look the same, but they're indeed fun panels. You'll just have to trust me. They're thicker, and I glued them up without dominoes. See, we're already having fun. And I did this because these panels are going to be half the thickness of the actual desktop, and they're also the most work I've ever put into the bottom side of a tabletop, or like I said, in this case, a desktop. So the idea is that the bottom of the desk and the inner side of the vertical leg are going to have a large curve, as well as this kind of angled portion. And at first, my plan was to do this all by hand. First removing the bulk of the material with a router, then finessing the shape with sanding and maybe some hand tools. But to nobody's surprise, this was incredibly time consuming, and though these are technically the fun panels, doing it this way made it a lot less fun. So I did what anyone with a decently sized CNC router would do, and I let the machine do the hard work. And you'd imagine doing it this way made all of it a breeze, right? But like I've shown in some of my previous videos, I don't always work in perfect harmony with CNC machines. This time though, my issues were a little harder to explain, though I do have a theory. So if you look closely at these time-lapse shots, the CNC would randomly stop mid-cut. And these were supposed to be like hour-long or more cuts, and sometimes the machine would stop maybe after 15 minutes, or maybe go for 45. There really wasn't any rhyme or reason to it. And my initial thought was that my computer was going to sleep or trying to go to sleep, and it was interrupting things. So I spent the next maybe 30 minutes or so periodically making sure my computer was not going to sleep, and that seemed to be working until it didn't. So I fired everything up again to try and diagnose the problem, and at one point I had been using my dust collector hose to clean up some of the chips mid-cut. Then I walked over to my computer and touched my finger against the metal shell of the laptop, and I could feel a static electric shock, and the machine instantly stopped. After that, I went back and checked the footage, and sure enough, every time the machine stopped, I was using the dust collector hose, which I'm guessing would potentially end up touching the machine or a part of the machine and cause that same static electric shock. So the only thing to do at this point was to let the machine finish cutting from a safe distance. But does this sound right? I don't know much about electricity or static electricity and how that could affect a computer, or how this could potentially be the problem, but it seems kind of plausible, right? I don't know. Let me know if you have any insight or ideas on what might be going on here. Okay, I'm sure there are quite a few of you currently wondering why go to all that trouble to create these big curves that are just going to be on the bottom of the desk. And I really wish I had an insightful answer or some sort of profound reason for doing this, some design reason. But truly, I just thought it would be a cool detail and maybe something that you wouldn't notice at first glance. All right, as you can see, I'm currently making more panels, this time out of hard maple, and these are fun panels too since they are the other half of the thickness of the desktop. The idea was to create a layered look with the top being a very light color and the underside being a very dark color and having that curved detail. I've noticed that woodworkers and furniture makers seem to have a bit of an obsession with the unseen parts of a design. Maybe a tricky joint or something that's on the bottom backside of a dresser that will never be seen once the drawers are in place. Or I've often heard people say things like, the underside of our dining tables look just as good as the top. And as a fellow woodworker, furniture maker, I appreciate that, but it's something that I never really subscribed to. The bottom of any dining table I make is definitely going to look worse than the top. That's why it's the bottom. But on this desk, I went completely to the other side of the spectrum, and the underside is not only going to be just as nice as the top, it might actually be nicer, or at the very least, more interesting. And the amount of planning and work I had to put in to get it just right definitely made me question whether or not it would be worth it. You just saw me cutting in some dominoes to index the two layers and make sure they stayed perfectly in line with each other. I also cut in this kind of juice groove to prevent glue from squeezing out during the lamination process. And this was because I needed to pre-finish some of the edges that would be way too difficult to finish once the two layers were stuck together. And the thing is, this desk is going into the office of my shop, and very few people are going to see it in person. So all of these hidden details aren't really going to be seen by anybody, which is probably why I'm blabbering on and on about them so much in this video, because this is my one chance for people to appreciate all the hard work that I'm putting into this. So I guess now that I've said it out loud, the reason I went to all the trouble to create the big curves on the underside of the desktop is so I can talk about it in my YouTube video. All right, I know I said the panels for the cabinet were the boring panels, but bear with me for just a minute because even the boring stuff is important. And actually, I think we'll find out it isn't really as boring as I might make it sound. So, if I had to pick one thing that everyone should learn early in their woodworking journey, it would be how to make panels, and specifically, how to make them well. Then, how to take those panels and turn them into a cabinet. Because it might seem boring, but in reality, there are so many things we have to think about and do during the process, you really just have to stay on your toes. All my panels are cut to finished dimension at this point, so the kind of knee-jerk reaction might be that I can glue up the cabinet, right? Well, I'm opting for miter joints at each corner instead of just butt joints, so we need to cut those first. I always prefer to cut these on the table saw, but because the top and bottom panels are so long, I'll use a track saw for those. Okay, miters are cut in. Now we can glue it up? Well, not quite. Because I'm using miter joints, I needed to cut in some domino mortises to make aligning all the panels much easier and to add a bit of strength. So now we can glue it up. No, there are going to be a couple vertical dividers inside the cabinet, so I need to cut a couple dados first. And the easiest and honestly most precise way to do this is while the panels are still separate, and that ensures that the top and bottom dados are going to be perfectly in line with each other. Okay, and now we can glue, well, what about that front edge detail? Probably a good idea to cut that in before the glue up. You could wait until afterwards, but this way is just much easier in this specific situation. Okay, so now back edge rabbet for the back panel. Can't forget that. Again, could be done after the fact, but let's do it now. And actually, here's a bona fide woodworking tip. Every once in a while I have one of those. Sometimes when cutting rabbets, especially in wood that's prone to chipping and tear out like this red oak, you won't get a clean cut when using a rabbeting bit and router. So a great way to avoid this is by implementing the mighty climb cut. And this just means moving the router in the same direction as the rotation of the router bit, almost like a tire on the road, as opposed to pushing the router against the rotation of the bit, which is usually how we do it. And this will dramatically decrease the chances of tear out and just give you a much cleaner cut. The only thing is, you need to be careful when doing this and take light passes, because when moving the router in this orientation, it can very easily get away from you. And I'd never recommend doing something like this with a deep cut or with a large router bit that's cutting a big surface area. All right, that's great, Sean. Now can we glue up the cabinet? Actually, yes. At this point, we can glue up the cabinet. So if making panels and making cabinets out of those panels is something you want to get better at, go check out all of our project courses. We have a handful of them that feature making solid wood and plywood cabinets, and we have a bunch of others that'll teach you all sorts of techniques through the process of building a piece of furniture. We have really done our best to make sure our courses are some of the best, and we think that these are a great way for anybody to take their woodworking to a new level. So go check those out if you're interested. Okay, you'll probably be happy to hear that at this point, we're done making panels. And if that doesn't make you happy and you're just a panel freak, just keep rewatching the first part of this video. I'm good with that. But for the rest of us, let's get into some real good stuff. One of the things I do when making a piece of furniture, and I think this could mostly be considered a flaw, is that I get a design figured out, more or less come up with a game plan for the building process, then I just kind of get started. And without a doubt, there'll be at least a couple places when I'm planning the build process where I'm not 100% sure how I'm going to do something. And I just kind of tell myself I'll figure it out when I get there. And on this build, the big miter joint for the desktop was definitely one of those places. And it was actually for a couple reasons. I already knew it would be too thick for any of my saws to make the full cut. So after finishing off the cut with a handsaw, I kind of had a rough result, and I wasn't sure if this was going to work, and I'm not one to reach for hand planes that often, but I sharpened up my little block plane and kind of just went for it, and I was happy to find that I was able to get the bevel cleaned up pretty nicely. The next thing I wasn't sure about was cutting in the dominoes to help reinforce the joint, and this was because I needed to reference the curved side of the desktop, which made me a little nervous. But this one actually just turned out to be my own anxiety getting the best of me, because it actually worked without any issues, and with the right clamps in the right spots, I got the miter joint glued up nicely. So what's the takeaway here? There's got to be some sort of lesson. Pre-planning is for the birds. Don't sweat the small stuff. Where there's a will, there's a way. Honestly, I don't really know right now, but I'm sure I'll figure it out at some point down the line. Okay, I know everyone is different, and we're all embarrassed by different things or feel shame about stuff, which is totally understandable. It's just part of being human. But I think there's some universal things that we're all ashamed of, and one of those is cables. We're all so embarrassed by our cables and cords, and these days we have a lot of them, that we're constantly trying to hide them or use as many wireless things as we can. And I'll freely admit I'm no different. I mean, I'm embarrassed you can see the cord on my router right now. So when I was designing this desk, I knew I wanted to do some serious cable management. So here's a rundown of what I was going for. The idea is that this left side cabinet is going to house my computer and internet router, and that means on the desktop I would just have my monitor and maybe a lamp. My computer keyboard and mouse are wireless, so that's good. So the central component of managing my cable shame was using the desk support piece here as a secret pass-through from the desktop to inside the cabinet. And the first part of that was figuring out how to attach a flat chunk of wood to a curved chunk of wood. I made this jig with an MDF template that matched the size of the support piece I was going to use, and a couple pieces that matched the curve of the bottom side of the desk. And this would allow the jig to sit flat against the bottom of the desk. Then I could use a couple template router bits to hog out a big mortise that I could then make the support piece with matching radiused corners to fit snugly into place. And I won't lie, this part was pretty nerve-wracking. We're at the point in the build where we're making huge modifications to things that have taken days to make, so messing up at this point is just not a good option. So that being said, why not make it a little more scary and start drilling holes through both the top of the cabinet as well as through the desktop? Then on top of that, I don't currently have a drill press, so I had to rely on my CNC to drill out the hole through the support piece. This is all fine. I'm not stressed. It's totally fine. The final piece to all of this, the most stressful part, and the one thing I'm not totally convinced was the best idea, was this sort of cable tray I made in the desktop. I basically wanted to have cables drop into the desk and run to the pass-through that wasn't in a single spot like those desktop grommets that you can buy. So I came up with this idea so I could have my monitor cables enter here and the lamp cable enter here, and I wanted it to be as inconspicuous as a giant rectangular hole in a desktop can be. And I think I actually executed it about as well as I could have hoped, but I'm just not sold on this being the best solution for what I was trying to do. Either way, I did it, and I'm looking at it as I say this, and I'll look at it for as long as I have this desk, but at least I'm not embarrassed by my cables anymore. Though, I mean, come on, that's pretty satisfying. The second part of my cable management master plan was to make a small control panel on the top of the cabinet. As much as I'm ashamed of my cables, I really love analog style controls on electronics, which is weird that I'm willing to have this on my desk, but a few cords is a big no-no. Whatever, I am not even going to try to explain it to you or myself. But because my computer is going to live inside a cabinet, I needed a way to connect things like hard drives to it easily without having to reach under the desk. And I also wanted to have a headphone jack, an XLR input for my microphone, and a couple switches because analog switches are pretty cool. So I machined an aluminum plate to fit all of the components, then no big deal, just cut another massive hole into the top of the cabinet. And doing stuff like this where you're experimenting or trying stuff for the first time can be stressful and nerve-wracking, but it really is kind of the only way to progress your skill, which is why we chose this idea as the theme of the current ROCKLER challenge. The challenge runs until the end of the year, so there's still plenty of time to get involved if you want to. I'm going to put a link in the description with a bunch more info, so go check it out if you're interested. One of my favorite parts about furniture making, and especially about making furniture for YouTube, is the fact that I basically never make the same thing twice anymore. That being said, there are still some things that will feel repetitive no matter what, and I think you might know where I'm going with this: drawer boxes. No matter what, if a piece of furniture needs drawers, it's more or less the same process every time. And even worse than actually doing it is talking about it again and again for videos. So if you're okay with it, I'm going to skip the usual drawer box stuff If you're a drawer box freak, I have plenty of other videos where I make them, but instead, let's take a look at some of the more interesting things I had to do for this one. So that fancy little control panel I just made, well, that created a situation where I now would have cables hanging down into a space where one of my top drawers would go. So in order to keep the cables hidden and still make the front of the cabinet look normal, I decided to make a false removable drawer front, which I would secure with magnets. And this was simple enough to get everything nicely into place.
Damn it.
Okay, just need to switch a couple things around here. Magnets to the top, and we can get that installed. Okay, after a few deep breaths, I could move on to figuring out the drawer pulls. This was another classic figure it out in the moment. I knew I wanted something really simple, and I played around with some different integrated handle ideas, but nothing was working very well, and I just kind of wasn't loving how things were starting to look. A lot of times drawer fronts and drawer pulls are a great way to add some interesting details to a piece and maybe a chance to get creative with some intricacies. But I knew for this one, I wanted it to be subtle, or as subtle as possible, and I didn't want to detract from the overall look of the piece by making something that was too over the top. And I had the same feeling about the cabinet door. It needed to be functional by allowing airflow into the cabinet, but I didn't want to do anything too eye-catching. So a simple frame and panel door with some slots cut for said airflow. So in my last video where I built this small side table, I finished the red oak base with a black tinted polyurethane finish, which I've used many times in the past, and a lot of people really liked it and wanted to know what I used. So it's General Finishes black poly if you're one of the people asking. But at the exact same time, I was getting quite a few people telling me they hated it and that I ruined the entire piece because of it and all sorts of other things. So in an attempt to make everyone happy, and by everyone, I mean me, I decided to turn all of the red oak on this piece black again, and there was a lot of red oak. So if you've made it this far, and you don't think I ruined this piece with the black finish, and if you aren't subscribed, I know that's a lot of qualifiers, but click the subscribe button if you like what I'm doing. I still feel like I'm getting my wheels turning after being away from my channel for so long, but we'll get there. And if you want to see extra content or snag a t-shirt, go check out my Patreon. I'll put a link down below. And of course, no matter what, thanks for watching and supporting. So going back to what I said at the beginning of the video, and the fact that when I'm making something for myself, I get to do whatever I want. And this is really the first time I've gotten to do whatever I want, which is why there are ridiculous details nobody will ever notice, like the curved underside of the desk or a custom control panel. And the best part about it is that I got to experiment with all this stuff, and the only person I truly have to answer to is myself. So that being said, the reality is that I didn't just make this desk for myself, because this video is the real product of what I do. So at the end of the day, I made a lot of the design choices for myself, but I still truly hope people like what I built. And if you really do think I ruined the piece or that I'm an idiot for doing something a certain way, I really do mean this when I say,